After my grandmother's estate was settled, the attorney handling it quietly said, "Before you celebrate, pretend the money is gone." I took his advice. The next day I understood exactly why he had warned me. The attorney closed the folder with my grandmother's will, looked directly at me and said something that made no sense. "Before you celebrate, pretend the money is gone." I thought I had misheard him. The meeting about my grandmother Margaret Collins' estate had just ended. My parents were still outside the office talking with my sister Olivia about dinner plans. Everyone seemed unusually cheerful. Mr. Daniel Harper waited until the door closed before he spoke again. "Tell them you already spent the inheritance paying off a loan." Asked why. He did not explain. He only said it would be a good idea if I did. Then he handed me the paperwork and walked away down the hallway. That conversation lasted less than a minute, but it stayed in my head the entire drive home. The strange part was that everything my family had done during the past week suddenly felt different when I replayed it. My grandmother had died 9 days earlier. For the last 2 years I had been the one helping her with groceries, appointments, fixing small things around the house. It never felt like a sacrifice. She lived 15 minutes away and I liked spending time with her. The rest of the family visited occasionally. Holidays mostly. But after the funeral something changed. My father suddenly started calling every day asking how I was doing. My mother kept inviting me over for dinner. Olivia, who usually only texted when she needed something, began sending long messages asking if I needed help with anything. At first I thought everyone was just trying to support me. But during the estate meeting something strange happened. When the lawyer announced that my grandmother had left the remaining assets entirely to me, no one looked surprised. Not even a little. My father nodded like he had expected it. Olivia smiled and said it made perfect sense since I had been helping Grandma the most. My mother kept repeating that I deserved it. No one asked how much money it was. They just looked at me with the same quiet attention. Later that evening my parents insisted we all have dinner together to celebrate. That was the word my father used. Celebrate. At dinner Olivia talked about how important family support was. My father said that money should always stay within the family. My mother agreed with both of them. I sat there realizing that every sentence somehow circled back to the same idea. Family helping family. That was when the lawyer's warning started to bother me. Before you celebrate, pretend the money is gone. I almost ignored it. The advice sounded paranoid. But the next morning my parents invited me to breakfast. Olivia said she might stop by too. While I drove to their house I decided I would try the lawyer's suggestion. Just once. Just to see what happened. So when we all sat down at the kitchen table, my father asked the question everyone had been waiting to ask. "So Emma, have you figured out what you're going to do with the inheritance?" I took a sip of coffee and said something that immediately changed the room. "Actually, the money's already gone." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Olivia leaned forward. "Gone?" I nodded. "Yeah. I had an old loan I never told anyone about. I used the inheritance to pay it off yesterday." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. But in those few seconds I watched my entire family change. For a few seconds after I said the money was gone, nobody moved. My father was the first to react. "What loan?" The question came out quickly, like he had already been thinking about the money and suddenly needed to recalculate something. I shrugged. "A personal one. It had been hanging over me for years." My mother looked confused. "You never mentioned anything like that." "I didn't think it mattered before." Olivia leaned back in her chair and stared at me. "How big was the loan?" "Pretty big." That was all I said. The conversation slowed down after that. It was almost uncomfortable how fast the energy drained from the room. A few minutes earlier my parents had been talking about celebrating my future. Now everyone seemed distracted. My father checked his phone twice. My mother stood up to refill coffee that nobody had finished. Olivia stopped smiling. Then my father asked something that sounded casual but wasn't. "So, there's nothing left?" "No." Another silence. My mother sighed and said something that surprised me. "Well, at least the debt is gone." But she didn't sound relieved. Olivia suddenly remembered she had somewhere to be. "I promised Jenna I'd help her move some boxes." She stood up, grabbed her bag and left 10 minutes later. Breakfast ended soon after that. No one suggested celebrating anymore. When I drove home the quiet in my car felt different. It wasn't sadness or grief. It was clarity. Because the change in my family had been immediate. It was like watching someone flip a switch. Still, I told myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe everyone was just surprised. But that afternoon my phone rang. It was Olivia. For a moment I thought she might apologize for rushing off earlier. Instead she asked something else. Emma, can I ask you something honestly? Sure. You didn't really waste the whole inheritance on a loan, right? I told her the same thing. It's gone. There was a pause on the line. Then she laughed, but the laugh sounded forced. Well, that's irresponsible. I didn't answer. He kept going. You could have invested it or something. Grandma worked her whole life for that money. That was the moment I realized something. The concern in her voice wasn't about my financial situation. It was about the money itself. 2 hours later my mother called. Not to ask how I was doing. She asked almost the exact same question Olivia had. Are you absolutely sure the inheritance is gone? Yes. Another long pause. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. Your father and I thought maybe we could all help Olivia start her business with part of it. I didn't say anything. My mother continued. But if the money's already spent, well, that's unfortunate. Unfortunate. That word stayed with me long after the call ended. By the evening, no one from my family had contacted me again. The sudden attention I had been getting all week completely disappeared. No messages. No invitations. Nothing. And that was when I started wondering if the lawyer had already known exactly what was going to happen. Because the next morning, something even stranger happened. My father showed up at my apartment. But he didn't come inside. He just stood near his car in the parking lot and said something that made it clear the situation was getting worse. Emma, we need to talk about some decisions you made. My father didn't even try to come upstairs. He stood next to his car in the parking lot and waited until I walked out of my building. Emma, we need to talk about some decisions you made. That was the first sentence. No greeting. No asking how I was doing. Just that. I asked what decisions he meant. He looked irritated already. The inheritance. You said you spent all of it paying some loan. Yes. He shook his head slowly. That wasn't very smart. I said nothing. For a moment he just stood there like he expected me to apologize. When I didn't, he continued. Your mother and I were thinking about the future of this family. Olivia's business could have benefited from some of that money. That surprised me. Grandma left the inheritance to me. He immediately responded. Yes, but we're still family. That word again. Family. Yesterday everyone had been proud of me for taking care of Grandma. Today I was apparently irresponsible for using the money that had been left to me. My father kept talking. You should have at least discussed it with us first. I asked him a simple question. Why? He looked annoyed that I even asked. Because we could have made a smarter plan. Boo. He didn't answer that directly. Instead he said something else. Your sister is trying to build something. You could have helped her. That was interesting. 2 years of helping Grandma had never been called important. But Olivia's future business suddenly was. My father checked his watch like the conversation was already wasting his time. Anyway, what's done is done. Just try to make better decisions in the future. Then he got into his car and left. The entire conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes. That afternoon my mother called again. Her tone was different this time. Less warm. Emma, I just think you should understand that people might feel disappointed. Disappointed? Your grandmother's money could have helped the family. I reminded her that Grandma had specifically left it to me. My mother sighed. Yes, but sometimes people make emotional decisions when writing wills. That sentence stayed with me. Emotional decisions. Like leaving money to the person who actually spent time with her. Over the next 2 days the change became impossible to ignore. The constant messages from my family stopped completely. No one invited me to dinner anymore. Olivia didn't text. My parents didn't call unless they needed something small. By the 3rd day it felt like I had quietly disappeared from the family. That was when I decided to test something. I called Olivia and asked if she wanted to get lunch. She hesitated. I'm kind of busy lately. A week earlier she had been offering to help me with everything. Now she didn't even want lunch. That evening I sat in my apartment thinking about the lawyer's strange warning. Pretend the money is gone. At first I thought it was unnecessary. Now I realized something else. He probably expected exactly this reaction. But the situation still confused me. Why had he been so sure? The answer came 2 days later when I received a message from him asking if I could stop by his office. When I arrived, he closed the door and said something that explained everything. Emma, I'm guessing your family has already started treating you differently. When I sat down in Mr. Harper's office, he didn't look surprised to see me. He closed the door, returned to his desk, and asked a simple question. Your family started acting differently, didn't they? I nodded. Completely. He folded his hands and waited. So the money is gone now, according to them. Yes. Good. That word caught me off guard. Good. He leaned back slightly. Then the real story started to come out. Your grandmother asked me to do something unusual a few months before she passed away. That immediately got my attention. She had been thinking carefully about what would happen after she died. Not about the money itself, but about how people might behave because of it. Apparently, she had noticed the same thing I did during the last year of her life. Certain family members had suddenly become very attentive. Visits became more frequent. Phone calls appeared out of nowhere. People who rarely came by started asking her how she was feeling. Mr. Harper opened a folder and slid a paper toward me. Your grandmother believed that once people knew you inherited the estate, they might start treating you differently. I stared at the document but didn't read it yet. So she asked you to warn me? Yes. He paused. But that wasn't the only reason. He tapped the folder. Your grandmother also left very specific instructions about the inheritance. Instructions I wasn't aware of during the estate meeting. He explained that legally the inheritance was already mine. But the assets themselves were still in protected accounts that would not transfer to me for another 30 days. Your grandmother insisted on that delay. But he answered calmly. Because she wanted you to have time to observe people. The idea was simple. If anyone believed the money was gone, their real intentions would appear quickly. And if someone genuinely cared about you, nothing would change. I thought about the past few days. My father criticizing my decisions. My mother calling the inheritance unfortunate. Olivia suddenly too busy for lunch. Mr. Harper continued. Your grandmother trusted you, Emma. But she didn't trust everyone around you. I finally asked the question that had been forming in my mind. Did she expect things to go this badly? He didn't hesitate. Yes. That answer sat heavily in the room. Then he added one more detail. And there's something else you should know. He turned another page in the folder. Because the inheritance wasn't just money. It included several investment accounts and 2 properties your grandmother never sold. The total value was significantly larger than what anyone in your family probably imagined. I asked how much. Mr. Harper told me the number. For a moment I thought I misunderstood him. It was several $1,000,000. He watched my reaction carefully. Your grandmother wanted you to see who people really were before you gained access to it. I sat there realizing something strange. The past few days had already shown me more than enough. But the real shock came when Mr. Harper said one more thing. Your father actually called me yesterday. That made my stomach tighten. But he asked if there was any way to review the estate again. Apparently he believes you may have misunderstood how the inheritance works. Then Mr. Harper looked directly at me. I'm guessing your family still believes the money is gone. I nodded. Yes. He closed the folder slowly. Good. Because what happens next might tell you even more about them. And the next thing that happened proved he was absolutely right. 3 days after my meeting with Mr. Harper, my mother invited me to dinner. That alone was unusual. Since I told them the inheritance was gone, no one in my family had shown much interest in seeing me. The message from my mother was short. Your father and Olivia are coming over tonight. You should join us. No mention of the inheritance. No mention of anything important. Just dinner. I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different from the moment I walked inside. Not cold exactly. Just distant. My father was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone. Olivia was leaning against the counter. My mother was finishing something in the kitchen. No one hugged me. That was new. We sat down and started eating. For a while the conversation stayed on harmless topics. Work. Someone Olivia knew who had moved to Arizona. Then my father finally brought up the subject everyone had been avoiding. Emma, I've been thinking about what you told us. About the loan. I nodded. He continued. I spoke with a financial advisor yesterday. He said sometimes there are ways to recover money if debts were paid improperly. I looked at him. Recover money? Yes. The lender pressured you or something like that. Olivia added something immediately. Or if the contract wasn't written properly. I realized they had already discussed this before I arrived. I told them the loan had been legitimate and already closed. My father frowned slightly. That's unfortunate. Olivia pushed her plate aside. Honestly, Emma, it still doesn't make sense to me. You never mentioned this loan before. I shrugged. I kept it private. She looked annoyed. Well, it affected the whole family. That sentence almost made me laugh. The whole family. My mother finally joined the conversation. We're not trying to criticize you. We just think your grandmother would have wanted the money to help everyone. That was the second time I had heard something like that. Apparently my grandmother's wishes were now open for interpretation. The rest of the dinner passed quietly. When I stood up to leave, Olivia walked me to the door. She said something as soon as we stepped outside. I hope you realize this changes things. I asked what she meant. She crossed her arms. You made a selfish decision. That was the word she chose. Selfish. I didn't argue. I just said goodnight and drove home. Sitting in my apartment later that night, I thought about everything that had happened during the past week. The sudden kindness after the funeral. The interest in my future. The talk about family support. And how quickly all of it disappeared. Mr. Harper had been right. Pretending the money was gone had revealed everything. But there was still one thing left to do. Because in 23 days, the inheritance would officially transfer to me. And when that happened, my family would eventually discover the truth. The question was how. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. And a week later, when my parents and Olivia finally learned that the money had never been gone at all, their reaction was even worse than I expected. 23 days passed quietly. During that time, my relationship with my family almost disappeared. My parents stopped inviting me over. Olivia didn't text at all. The only contact I had with them were short messages about random family matters that didn't require real conversation. The sudden warmth that appeared after my grandmother's death had completely evaporated. It was almost impressive how fast it happened. Meanwhile, I met with Mr. Harper twice more. He walked me through the actual inheritance. The accounts, the properties, the investments my grandmother had built over decades. The numbers still didn't feel real. But something else became clear during those meetings. My grandmother had not just been careful with money. She had been careful with people. On the 30th day, the accounts were officially transferred. The inheritance was now entirely mine. That evening, I received a call from my mother. Emma, we're having dinner Sunday. You should come. Her tone sounded slightly warmer than it had in weeks. I suspected why. Mr. Harper had told me something a few days earlier. My father had called his office again asking questions about the estate, which meant they were starting to wonder if my story about the loan was actually true. So Sunday evening I drove to my parents' house again. The atmosphere was noticeably different this time. My father greeted me at the door. Olivia was already sitting at the table. My mother seemed unusually attentive. For the first time in weeks they were acting like a family again. Dinner went on for about 20 minutes before my father asked the question. Emma, I spoke to the lawyer again recently. I waited. He says the estate paperwork was finalized this week. That was true. My father watched my face carefully. Which means the inheritance officially transferred to you now. Yes. Olivia leaned forward slightly. So, about that loan you mentioned. I took a sip of water before answering. There was never a loan. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. My father stared at me. What do you mean? I told you the money was gone because your lawyer warned me something interesting might happen if people thought that. My mother looked confused. Warned you about what? I looked around the table. About how people might behave once they believed the inheritance existed. No one spoke. Then Olivia asked the question slowly. So the money is still there? Yes. My father's expression changed instantly. Emma. That wasn't funny. It wasn't meant to be. My mother looked shocked. Why would you lie to us like that? I answered honestly. Because I wanted to see what would happen. No one interrupted. I continued. And now I know. Olivia stood up from her chair. So what, this was some kind of test? I nodded. Yes. My father looked angry now. You tricked your own family. I looked at him for a moment. You all showed me exactly how you felt when you believed there was nothing to gain from me. No one denied it. That was the most interesting part. Finally, my mother asked the question she really cared about. So what happens with the inheritance now? I stood up from the table. Now I live my life. I thanked them for dinner and walked out of the house. Behind me, I heard Olivia saying something to my parents, but I didn't stay to listen. Over the next few weeks, my phone suddenly started receiving messages again. My parents wanted to reconnect. Olivia had new business ideas she wanted to discuss. Family dinners were suggested. But things were different now. Because the most valuable thing my grandmother left me wasn't the money. It was the chance to see everyone clearly before it arrived. And once you see people clearly, it becomes very easy to decide who deserves to stay in your life.